Hi, I'm Dr. Gwen. I'm a neurotypical psychologist who's been empowering the neurodiverse community for over 20 years. Have you ever wondered what an executive functioning coach is, or if one is right for you? Well, in today's episode, I interview Dr. Clarence Perkins, an attention and executive functioning coach, to find out. Hey, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to welcome Dr. Clarence Perkins, ADHD and Executive Functioning Coach, to the episode today. Hi, Clarence. How are you?
Hi, Gwen. Thanks for having me.
This has been a while in the making, so I am so glad that we were able to connect and, able to talk about executive functioning coaching today. But before we do that, I'm wondering if you can educate the audience or let the audience know who you are.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Dr. Clarence Perkins. I invite everyone to call me Clarence. I live here in Los Angeles, and I do ADHD and executive function coaching through primarily Zoom or video conferencing. Background-wise, my doctorate's in education. I recall back in 1991, meeting with a student advisee. And, we just kind of met quickly, milk and cookies kind of thing, just to get to know each other. And he said to me, do you know I have ADHD? And I was like, is that contagious? I had never heard those words before, right? And I was like, wow, okay. What do I have to deal with now? And then he started to explain it. And I said to myself, oh, there's a word for that. There's a diagnosis for that, right? Mm-hmm. Otherwise, smart, capable, bright people who are disorganized or can't follow through on plans or impulsive. And that really was the beginning of my journey, because as an educator, I definitely bumped into students who struggled with these things. And I educated myself. This was before I entered a doctoral program, and I was always interested in educational psychology, understanding how to best serve my students. So my ultimate foundation is started with students, but then over time, I got promoted through the ranks, and I started to, as a principal, meet with families of students who had these challenges, ADHD or executive function. And so then you started to learn how to help families create structure at home, support their child at home. And as a principal, I had staff, adults, professionals, who also had the challenge of executive functions and ADHD. And my initial response is always, how can I support you? So again, I started to develop all these skills around this area. And I said, you know what? I want to take this show on the road. And so I decided to open up a coaching practice around ADHD and executive function. So right now I see students, both high school, typically college, grad students who are working on a dissertation. Usually that's the big challenge. And I work with professionals, supporting them as they manage professional responsibilities and family and relationship responsibilities. And I have a handful of retirees who are just trying to explore ways to have that part of their lives be fulfilling without the structure of going into the job every day, right? And not just kind of having all these plans about things they want to do, like the big vacation that retirement is, and every day waking up and spending your time on the phone instead of doing the things you want to do. So that goes a little bit towards what executive function coaching is, but that's typically the population I work with.
Yeah. And, as you're talking about ADHD or even like executive functioning issues, which you've touched upon briefly, it's not something that you see, per se. It's not a physical disability for that matter. And so I think there can be a lot of complications or misunderstandings about why people do what they are, especially when they're bright, engaged, motivated. How do you how do you kind of close the gap as a teacher maybe on like, well, I've got a bright, motivated, highly ambitious student who doesn't turn in work.
Right.
Like, right. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'll go back to the student my advisee I first met. He's a great kid, a spectacular, to this day, a leader. You know, I follow him a little bit online. And, you know, I think he helped me become an advocate for kids and adults who are misunderstood, because a lot of what ADHD or executive functions look like, they seem to be moral qualities. A person is, you know, you'll hear, so-and-so would do well in my class if they were just motivated to get their work done. So-and-so, you know, people still use the word lazy. You know, if they weren't so lazy, they would achieve, right? Or sometimes a partner would say, my partner I can't trust him to pick up the kids, you know, on time. I can't trust him to go to the grocery store without buying all this unnecessary. I can't trust him to hold down a job. So in our culture, these things are moral qualities, but ultimately the source is more neurological. And so when people come for executive function coaching, or, you know, their parents are like, go see Clarence, it's typically about helping someone gain control over their lives so that they can live purposefully and reach their goals. And I really enjoy that process. You know, coaching is also a mentoring relationship. You know, I don't bill myself as a teacher. I don't teach things, I coach things, because a lot of this really is about habit formation. Getting into the habit of success and goal orientation.
That's so lovely. I love that kind of advocacy, understanding why people do what they do. And that when it's neurological, or you're, you know, neurodivergent, that's how you're wired. So there's nothing wrong with you. That's not there to be fixed. The question is your neurological wiring in the context of life. How is that serving you or not? And what do you do about that? So I love that. What it sounds like is one of the first things you do is just kind of amplify voice and understanding of the person in order to find out what you can do to support them and what habits. And habit formation's tough. Like,
yeah, it is.
Like, it really, it's a hard job because I think sometimes there's other habits that need to be interrupted by new habits.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, I focus on habit formation primarily because I would say a core engine to the challenges the clients who sign up for me face, I think, for lack of a better word, would be sort of, they have a stream of overwhelming thoughts that's kind of always running in the background. And so even well-intentioned attempts to create habits get undermined by wondering, should I continue with this behavior or not? Is this the right habit to develop or not? And sometimes that kind of thinking, pressured thinking, can just prevent them from following through and creating the neurological pathways to create the habit. You know, is there a better way I could do this? And then all of a sudden the consistency gets removed. And so one thing we do in coaching is I say, this is the right neurological pathway to develop. You're on the right track. Let's stick with it. Don't let thoughts or questions undermine your using this habit. And a really great example would be, should I use a digital calendar or task list, or should I use a paper? And so on Thursday, let's do paper because that seems cool. On Friday, maybe I should use my calendar. On Monday, well, maybe a different planner. And then on Thursday, maybe there's a better app. Let me search for 3 hours to find a better app that can help me fix this. And then 2 weeks later, you've used nothing consistently. So there's no habit that you've created. So one of the first things we'll say is, let's pick something and stick with it. If it's really bad, we'll get rid of it, but let's just develop the habit of reaching for this one tool and not searching for the perfect tool that just undermines creating the habit to use the tool.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Clarence, I wonder if we shouldn't kind of back up a little bit and just talk about what ADHD and executive functioning difficulties look like functionally. So if someone's listening to this episode and they're like, I don't know what that is. I don't know the way ADHD looks or executive functioning difficulties look. And I wonder if you could just help people. I know it's a generality, right? But maybe help people understand, if you've got some attentional difficulties or executive functioning difficulties, this is what it might look like in your life.
Okay. Let me lay out some terms and start to build on them in a very practical way. Russell Barkley used a phrase, Dr. Barkley, and I enjoy kind of repeating and using that phrase. He mentioned around executive functions that the ability to independently regulate attention, behavior, and emotions. All right. So when you look at that, you need to regulate these things by yourself, right? You can't have someone else regulate them for you, right? That's a main piece, doing this independently. And then your attention, you can bring your attention to what you need to bring your attention to in a regulated way. You can regulate your behavior. It's not necessarily impulsive. It's not outside of your control. And then emotions, right? So if there's a problem to be solved, if there's a hurdle, if you have to spend a little time doing a non-preferred activity before a preferred activity to navigate those things emotionally. So that's kind of a foundation that I use, looking at those three things that need to be regulated. So what might this look like? Let's start with time management. So many people don't pay attention to the perception of time that happens in their bodies. Like I've been sitting here in a chair and I can feel the pressure points. And by habit, I know the pressure point has meant that I spent about this much time in the chair. So I have a physical way of perceiving passage of time. Many parents know that they can have a child who loves video gaming and the video gaming is so stimulating, and they wonder how their child can sit in the same seat for 10 hours playing a video game without noticing they need a break. And that's because their attention is really on the screen and the video game, and it's not in their body noticing discomfort, legs are tired, I need to take a break. So that's kind of where you place your attention. Many people cognitively struggle with time management because they, even if they have a daily routine, they're not sure how much time they need to make coffee, how much time they need to make breakfast, how much time they need for a shower, how much time the commute will take. What if there's an accident? They conceptually, they don't build that time in. It's a challenge for them. And so they might always be late for things or too early. Many people also are challenged by the idea that if they tell a friend or they have an event responsibility, an appointment, they'll say, oh, I'll remember that, right? It's very clear in my head right now. I'll remember it. And then they totally forget it. And that can happen and happen and happen without using a calendar, right? So someone who wants to learn how to use a calendar, it seems like a simple tool, but there's a lot that goes into that. And a lot of it is attentional and emotional. I have clients who will say, I don't want to look at a calendar because I will see all the events I missed. So if I don't look at the calendar, I don't have that feeling, right? So they're reinforcing a feeling of, I just don't want to do this, right? I'll do it later. So what can happen in coaching is in our sessions, we'll look at the calendar and we will problem solve missed events. And over time, a person will say, I've looked at this enough. I know I've not missed anything. So now I can use a calendar. And that's a very simple technique. So that's time. Another would be task management. This is, I work with several professionals who can't seem to manage how to get a project done at work or lead a team to complete a project. And typically the project is announced, and rather than entering into a problem-solving routine, they start to get overwhelmed. How am I going to get this done? I didn't get it done well last time. I might repeat that. I've got to take all this on. And so those emotions create a procrastination effect until it's close to the deadline. And then there's a scramble and everyone has to come together and everyone says, couldn't you have told me this last week that you needed this? Right. So one of the challenges would be to basically say, what is my task process? Many people don't even articulate a due date for when they want it done. Many people don't articulate a start date. When do I want to start this project? No process for delegating. Who has the best skills for this part of the project? Struggle to break things down into smaller tasks. And again, cognitively, they're really smart people. They're engineers, right? Software engineers. They can build things that can put, they will be the people who will put, men and women on Mars.
Yeah.
But they can feel overwhelmed by laying out tasks.
Yeah. And, I feel like when we talk about attentional issues or challenges and executive functioning issues, what inevitably gets missed is the emotional aspect of executive functioning, to the point, because some of the things that you said, your lived experiences might, and the way you cope with your lived experiences might say, I'm going to avoid that. I'm going to, I don't want to look at that. The other, though, too, is just like, the ability to tolerate some discomfort and frustration that is inevitable in the context of either learning or even learning a new system, learning about yourself, learning a new skill, whatever that is. I think we tend to forget that emotions play a huge role in managing our attention and completing tasks as well.
Yeah, one, illustration I use is if you think about a sailboat, right? Our cognitive skills might be the sail, but the wind, definitely our emotions, right? We have to feel emotionally, typically what we need to feel, right, is that this task we can complete successfully.
Yeah.
Completing this task will reinforce the good qualities we believe in ourselves to have.
Yes.
This task will not get me punished in any way, will not get me fired, will not have a negative effect, right? Yeah. So all these are ideas that bounce around as we're thinking about a task, and they do have to line up pretty significantly in order for us to be motivated to complete it. And many people sometimes they focus on the wrong bits of the past. In memories, they project that forward and they can't move on a task. For some people, it's true, they can't really complete the task, but they don't know how to problem solve and get help to complete the task, right? There's a sense that all tasks have to be completed independently. I can't have any help on any task. No, I don't need help writing a paper. No, I don't need help with this brief. No, right? There's a perception of isolation. Right. But again, it's all managing of affect. So.
Yeah, it's really, I think it's very nuanced. This is a very nuanced skill. And, we've been talking, like on my channel anyway, we talk a lot about executive functioning and a lot of the kind of more current and updated research on executive functioning and how when we don't look at the bottom parts, the bottom up kind of ways that affect the motor sensory pieces that affect executive functioning, we really miss why we're effective or not. And, the things that you're talking about too, because, someone that might be listening to this might say like, oh my gosh, that totally happens to me, or I've thought those things. Let's talk about what, how a coach is specifically helpful in that situation. One of the ways I'm already hearing is a coach or a mentor provides and helps provide or create a framework for which you understand yourself and how you might use tools. I mean, that's right off the bat. Right. I wonder if you can talk about other ways that a coach is specifically helpful in some of the functional issues that you kind of highlighted earlier.
Yeah, sure. Again, let me do something maybe a little theoretical, conceptual, and build on it. Human beings aren't born with a manual how to use our brain, right? And we have the brain knows how to pick up cues and clues and strategies explicitly and implicitly to be human. But if your brain isn't wired the same way other brains are wired, you're going to hit your head against the wall trying to do things the way other people do them. And so one thing I like to do in executive function coaching is helping people understand how their brain is wired, and that they might see another, because one hope that most people have who come to me is that I can be like other people. Like I can show up on time. I can get the project done on time. I can pick up the kids on time. I can like other people, but I just can't do it like other people. And so I like this advocacy, and I'll say, you probably won't think it through and manage it internally like other people, but you can achieve the same result. You just didn't have the manual that said, I struggle with delay of gratification and I'm more impulsive. So it's harder for me to see beyond the difficult parts of a task. I just look at, no, that's not going to be fun, and I don't do it, knowing that, I want to get paid, so I got to get that task done. All right. So I enjoy helping people problem solve their own brains so that they can create a manual for how to use their brains to be successful. And, it could be, ADHD, it could be slow processing speed, it could be just various things that they're not attending to that I can see. And I'll say, well, for a student with slow processing speed, if they're starting chapter 3 in biology, walking into the classroom, having the teacher just start teaching, they're going to be overwhelmed, and then they're going to maybe act out, they're going to take notes, they're going to doodle. But why not just have a process of quickly reviewing chapter 3 before you go to class? Just looking at the pictures, getting some processing going. That's all you need. And you probably will hang on to more of the information and feel more motivated in class as the teacher introduces chapter 3. So that's your manual. That's, section 1.2 in How Do I Learn? I make sure I preview a little bit so that I'm less overwhelmed cognitively. So that's an example of, we live in a world of digital technologies, and I think that really, really can help. I prefer digital tools because they come to you. You don't have to just go to them. So if you have a piece of paper where you put your calendar, you typically have to go to that paper. You have to find the paper and you have to open it up and you have to read it. Whereas if you feel something vibrating in your pocket that says, oh, that must be an alert, you look at it and you're reminded, right? So I like things that come at my clients versus them having to search out. Most people love their phones. They love their digital stuff, and so they will keep that on their person. So I try to use that as a way. But everyone uses things differently. Some people don't like sophisticated task lists. They don't like complicated calendars. I have clients who prefer just like a digital notepad, and that's always on their front screen, right? And they just like that. So I try to pay attention to how the brain functions for each of my clients. I try to really listen to where they are naturally placing their positive energies, and we try to build on that. Because, this may be kind of strange to say, but I tell my clients that our job here isn't to make you normal. Our job here is to build on your strengths. Yeah. What you're good at, what you naturally are motivated to do, we're going to build on that. And that may look different. Another person in your family does it, but that's fine. We're not trying to do it like another person. We're trying to do it the way that you do it and the way that works for you.
Yeah, and I love that.
It's freeing for people to know that I don't have to be forced to do something that someone told me for 20 years to do and I don't want to do.
Yeah.
Someone is helping me to say, like, what you're doing, we can build on already. That's relieving for people.
Yeah, and I like that you differentiate the outcome. You can achieve the same outcome. The way in which you get there is different because you're wired differently. Right. Yes. You're neurologically wired differently. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a really leaning in. I imagine, Clarence, that there are some maybe adults that come to you that have never received a diagnosis and might have compensated in their own ways over time. But then maybe, a new job or expanding a family or something that adds more expectations and pressures, and then the compensatory tools kind of aren't enough any longer. Do you experience that when you've had adults that have come to you without any kind of diagnosis?
Yes. I think there are enough websites, podcasts, like we're doing now, webcasts, where people are bumping into neurodivergence.
Yeah.
And I think to a certain extent, it's being kind of normalized, right? That people think differently and do things differently. And so more people are kind of responding to that little bit of information without a formal diagnosis. Having said that, typically, as you mentioned, there's a shift in what I like to call shift in structure. So person's is a great student. They love the structure of school. They have a new Ph.D. and they've gone through 3 jobs, right? The structure of the job doesn't quite match their strengths where the structure of school did, right? So we might start coaching to help them become aware of how to structure the job world so that it feels to them like school so they can be productive. Or the opposite happens where they've tried school, they're struggling, but they're fantastic entrepreneurs, fantastic marketers. They're great business people, great workers, but they know they need a degree to reach certain goals. So then we have to kind of use that energy of being a great worker, a great business person to help them with school. So context is really important here. Someone who was single, they have a child, they feel overwhelmed, like managing themselves and managing someone else, they have to learn some skills for that.
Yeah.
And again, the retirement as well.
Yes, retirement. Yeah.
And they're finding they're doing nothing and they're starting to feel a little depressed because they can't decide what to do with their lives, and they have this, large chunk of time, and they were so excited, but they can't structure it. So that's another shift that we work on.
I mean, I love the idea of context. I mean, context plays a huge role in your attentional, behavioral, and emotional regulation because of lived experiences, because of your neurological profile, because of what your current demands, and that's why I think some of the clients that I support can have a difficult time with projecting about the future because so many variables can change and they're so sensitive to their environments and sensitive to the context that it's very hard. What I love about what you're doing is you're formalizing a process of self-knowledge, and self-awareness. And with that comes the ability then to manage yourself, to advocate, to regulate. You know, you got to know those things first, in order, you have to have that foundation anyway, in order to find the right job or understand why you're an amazing student, but you know, that shift to the workplace has been really challenging. And then that's not a characterological or moral, as you said, moral kind of quality about you. And that's kind of really understanding how you work in the world.
Yeah. And I think something else that came to mind in what you're saying is the people I work with tend to be very successful. They're very successful. They just want to, let's say, be more efficient, work less hard. They might want to not always be behind the 8 ball, but virtually everyone has a professional degree. I work with doctors, lawyers, researchers, therapists, psychologists, you know, people who, and I like that it's really about human performance, enhancing in human performance, right? Even my students who may have struggled, let's say their first or second year of college, you know, their IQs are still 130, 140, but their executive functions made it difficult for them to manage all the work, but they typically are very bright, very creative, you know, artists and musicians and scholars. It's a, you know, I just enjoy all of my clients. So I think people need to understand that, you know, you can be successful, and have executive function challenges. Yes. You can be successful and have ADHD. Where you want to jump into coaching is if you kind of want to have a little more control over the energies that you have to put into things. You know, you might be starting a family, getting married, and you can't do all-nighters to get projects done. You need to get projects done in a way where you can also come home and be with your partner. And so you might shift to getting coaching so you can learn how not to do everything the night before.
Yeah.
And again, reinforcing, because they're getting A's doing it the night before. So they're getting attaboys for doing it the night before, which is reinforcing. But the spouse is like, you're never home. You know?
Yeah, they've paid for it in other ways, right? Like you know, and sometimes we don't realize that we can pay for things emotionally. We can pay for things relationally, as well. And so even though the work product is still fantastic, it's, you know, it's costing you, I guess, in other ways. You know, the thing that I appreciate about coaching as well is that many of my clients that struggle with their attentional regulation, they really benefit from the structure of meeting with someone on a regular basis. And sometimes they have a difficult time setting deadlines with just themselves. It's like, that's an arbitrary deadline. It's just with me. But if I make that deadline with Clarence, and I've talked about it and I'm working on that system, I can see where some of that, the consistency of just meeting with someone to get momentum with the system, I think could be really helpful as well. Do you see that, or am I just imagining that could be helpful?
I jokingly say, especially at the beginning of coaching, my clients are most productive the evening before our meetings. So what I like to say is, you know, if a person is just holding him or herself accountable for a task or a project, they're going to let themselves off the hook. You know, I'll do it later. You know, it's going to be hard. I need to really get my energy up. I have to get the right notebook, or I have to get the right pen. You know, But if you add a little energy of, I know I'm going to have to talk to another person about whether or not I did this task. And, you know, I'm not going to punish them or anything like that, but just it gives them a little more energy to kind of get over that procrastination hurdle. that I would rather say I completed the task than to have to say I didn't complete the task. That little bit of energy can be enough to kind of get going.
Yeah.
And that's what most people appreciate. The other part is we tend to, in our sessions, when we go through a task, we'll break it down into subparts. And so it's a little easier to get going when you don't have to bite the whole elephant, right? You know, you can do it one bit. You know, what's that joke? How to eat an elephant? You know,
yeah,
one bite at a time. But a lot of people try to open their mouths to eat the whole elephant. It just does not work, right? So that can also help people get started, because most people will say, I can't get started. How do I initiate this task? So making it feel like you can get started in a small way that you can accomplish something big by just getting started, knowing that you want to report out, because it's not self-esteem, it's just self-efficacy. I want to be in a world where I know and other people know I can keep my promises. And if I promise that I would get this done, that's good energy to build a habit on, because habits really are, we don't want to violate our standards that we've set for ourselves. Like, if I want to be someone who is healthy, I know I need to walk, I need to avoid certain kinds of foods. I want to be that person. Therefore, I'm going to be consistent with that habit, because I want to be the kind of person who sees him or herself as doing that habit.
Yeah. I mean, I think you bring up some really savvy and sophisticated points that we know in psychology. You know, when you establish an identity about being healthy, right. the actions tend to fall in line better than, I just need to walk 3 times a week. I just need to walk 3 times a week. And that's not connected to an identity, right? So for there to be someone to have that conversation with, to formalize, sometimes we don't even think about our identities in a formal way, or voice them, or, you know, have a lexicon surrounding them, because we're just moment by moment, like we're just surviving. Yeah. So we don't have that chance to kind of self-reflect or look upon ourselves. I love that. I have a client that calls it, I'm not swallowing the whole burrito, because he loves burritos. So the same kind of idea. But, you know, there's an emotional piece to that, which is, if I feel overwhelmed, I'm not going to start it. You know, so being able to have someone help you break down the pieces where, you know, that doesn't feel so bad. And that activating just the first action in that sequence can be the most powerful energy spend that can happen, because then you're on a roll, right? So what's the absolute minimum you can do to activate that would be great.
And a couple of other things that I do, maybe to be granular here. You know, a lot of people, when they create a task list or they write something that's a task, they might say, you know, some broad project that is really hard to kind of look at and say, I can get started, right? So let's say they have to do a presentation, and they just will put as their task, presentation. And when they look at that task, their brain says, I know. All that I have to do, I got to do some research, I have to do this, I have to do that. You know what? I'll do that later. So I encourage my clients to have an action verb and pick the first task with that action verb that they can do, right? So it could be, I need to read 2 articles in the field, latest research, before I start putting together the project. So read 2 research articles. That's the task, instead of project or presentation.
Yep.
Because presentation is the elephant. Read 2 research articles is the bite.
And it's directive. It's also, you know, when you read it, it's a directive statement, right? And so I can take action on that.
To be there. The other thing I ask people to do is put a dash after sometimes before, sometimes after, where they have a word or 2 of the value of starting the task. right? So let's say you hate giving presentations, but you get fired if you don't do the presentation, right? Because the boss says we need a presentation. You like your job, it's fun, it's flexible, you enjoy it. So you might have keep job dash read to research articles. So you're bringing to mind the value of why you need to get started on this task. And for many people, they see the task and their brain kind of goes to, oh, I got to spend time on it. Why? It's not important. It's not valuable. It's not salient. But, if you enjoy public speaking but have a hard time getting started on your presentations, love public speaking dash read to research articles. Be mindful of the value of the task as you are doing the task, and that reinforces the energy to get the task done.
Yeah. Just as you're saying that, I had it resonated with me, just adding the value to the task as I think about many of the unfinished tasks or projects that I have on my list. And if I think about writing the value of that next to a next action step for myself, wow, that would probably change that. And I love this idea of self-efficiency or self-reliance. I can rely on myself and I keep my promises, that feels better. And I think that's where some of the moral judgments can come in, when you don't fulfill your promises and you don't show up to things or you miss things, it feels bad.
Yeah. I would say if there's something I'm proud of in my work with my clients is when someone kind of starts to articulate self-efficacy. Which is the belief that if I put effort into something, I can achieve a goal. Just that belief. And so many of the people who call me up don't have self-efficacy. They don't believe that they can harness and gain control of attention, behavior, and emotions to achieve a goal. And that is so human, right? That's why we give kids toys, because humans like to manipulate their environment. It's a way that we express ourselves. And so to not have confidence in that, to not feel that you can do that, I know is damaging to people. And to believe that you can do that idea of controlling your environment, manipulating your environment is so essential to living a vibrant and thriving. That when people start to articulate that and they start to spread the techniques we're using to other areas of life, all of a sudden they've always wanted to, let's say, pick up a musical instrument. But if I can't show up anywhere, if I can't remember where my music is, but once they start to get organized, their time is organized, they start and stop work projects and they actually have time on the weekends, they start to pick up, hobbies, they start to do things. And because they're starting to say, I can be in the world. And that's something I enjoy seeing in my clients. Self-efficacy is really important. And it's a fragile belief, that we don't all have.
Yeah. And I think it's a belief that gets built upon your evaluation of yourself. And, the more that you can, it's like a big lever to pull, if you can do things that you say you're going to do because you have a framework and a system that works with your brain, that cascades into other areas of life. And what a powerful lever to pull from a well-being, thriving perspective. That's amazing. Clarence, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this. If someone's listening to this and they're like, I think I want to explore, some help in these areas. What's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
The best way is through my website, drclarenceperkins.com. We'll start with a free consultation, right? 30 minutes just talking, getting to know each other, getting to know what the coaching needs are, and kind of coming to the conclusion together of whether my approach is helpful and whether coaching is the next step that would be helpful to them. So yeah, just really, there are web forms. You can sign up, you can call me, you can text me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I will put your website in the description below for people, so that's really easy to find. Clarence, thank you so much for coming on today and spending time with us.
My pleasure, Gwen. Thanks for having me.